But today, happy to talk about your Windows 10 to Windows 11 transition, and also about some EUC stuff, Nutanix as well, in a hybrid multi-cloud solution. So, you ready to go, Benjamin?
Ready to go.
All right. So, what's happening and why it matters? So, if you are still on Windows 10 and do not have a plan to get off of Windows 10 by October 14th of this year, there are some things to consider. So, October 14th, 2025, Windows 10 is end of life, which means end of security updates, end of new features, and end of fixes. Windows 10 will continue to live on and you can still run it, but you are leaving yourself and your organization in a vulnerable place because you're not going to have any kind of fixes, any kind of security updates, which is going to impact your environment from a security footprint, but also to a user productivity as well if there's something in the OS that causes problems that is not patched for. Now, you can pay and get extended security updates to the ESU program, but that is going to cost you. There's also the other route of if you're using Windows 365 and using that endpoint to access a Windows Cloud PC, you can also get extended support for that way. But those are two small use cases when you have lots of, or potentially have lots of Windows 10 devices out in your endpoint landscape. Anything to add there, Benjamin?
No, I mean the the number of organizations that I work with that haven't yet started down the Windows 11. October seemed, I mean, we just started off the new year. October seems like it's pretty far off, but as we discuss through the rest of the content, it's not just Windows itself that you have to deal with. It's going to be the integrations, the user workflows, everything like the desktop. If it was just getting a desktop to a user, that's the easy part. It's all the other pieces that touch it. So if you haven't started yet, make sure that you put some time on the calendar sooner rather than later to make sure that you're ready for that.
So, what are the key impacts of not upgrading Windows 10? Well, like you said, you're not going to get any kind of updates, fixes, patches, that kind of stuff. So, no security updates or support. So, if there's something that causes an issue that can be patched in the updates and you don't have the ability to do that, that's going to impact user productivity, right? So, anything that's going to impact that endpoint is going to impact the end user. But also, too, with no security updates, that's also going to give you some compliance and cyber attack risk as well. Because if that device is vulnerable, well, guess what? It's on your network, whether it's directly on your corporate network, whether it's coming across via VPN, whether you're even using any kind of remote technology that maps the drives is a potentially vulnerable way to get into your company. So leaving those devices vulnerable can leave the company vulnerable to any kind of risk there. And then hardware cost, right? So, not all Windows updates, I'm sorry, not all Windows 10 endpoints can be updated to Windows 11. So Microsoft has that checker, and certain processors are not capable of being upgraded. For example, one of my devices here, I have a Surface laptop where because of the processor, I can't be upgraded to Windows 11. So you're going to look at significant hardware and possibly software upgrade cost, making that transition, especially if you have older devices. There's ways that you can potentially reuse those devices, but if you want to get those devices to Windows 11, and they're not able to, that's a full refresh. That's going through the hardware, the software deployment, making sure that it's checked in with your systems and all that kind of stuff too, as well.
Yeah, and piggybacking too on the cyber risk. I mean, I think last year showed us that nobody's immune. The number of healthcare companies that were getting picked off by threat actors left and right, and the endpoint. I mean, it's truly the most vulnerable piece because it has the most exposure both technologically and physically. I mean, if that gets left in a coffee shop, if it gets dropped out of a bag at an airport or something like that, now anybody has access to it. So, certainly the costs are not cheap for going through and paying for either the extended updates or getting to Windows 11. but the cost of, poor publicity for your company having to publicly announce that you've been breached or you've had data in, unauthorized access, and then having to pay for customers security monitoring, credit monitoring, those that full picture of the costs really need to be taken into account.
And then, if you're still working with physical endpoints, think about all these different areas that can bring challenges to managing those, right? So patch management, especially if those devices are out in the wild, they're not just on your corporate network, or you have many corporate network locations, making sure those distributed endpoints are up to date, and they can also have different configurations on them as well. And then endpoint security risk, back to patch management. If you're having problems patching those, back to what we were saying, those devices, are vulnerable to evolving threats if you can't get those patched in a timely manner as new threats come out. And then think about recovery challenges, right? Benjamin just said if that device falls out of a bag, if you lose it, if something happens to it, if it gets broken, even if you're a remote employee and something happens to that device and you have to wait until that can be fixed or time to get a new one, for example, that's going to impact employee productivity. So just getting the data back off there, that kind of stuff, all those things come into impact about trying to recover end user's device. And then licensing too. You could look at potentially under or over provisioning the devices out there in a distributed landscape, which again is back to the cost of ownership of those devices. And then what about hybrid work? Being able to support when there's some kind of weather event, there's some kind of like a sickness happening, like we just got through with the pandemic, where an influx of users are no longer in the office and they're working from home or remote locations. Even having a sick child at home that you might have to stay home from work for. So think about that and making sure that those again are be able to make that change from going in the office to out of the office, but also too making sure that device is managed and up to date. And also think about sustainability concerns, right? Constant hardware refreshes. You're looking at e-waste right there, and then also too, having all those endpoints out there can also lead to significant energy consumption as well as companies are thinking about how can they reduce their carbon footprint.
Yeah, on the recovery, it's amazing how many times when I'm talking with a customer and I tell them that you need to, if for a physical endpoint, you need to have a minimum of a 3-day expectation on an event. And they're kind of give me a weird look. And I'm like, well, day one, the user has to ship it back, assuming that like you've said, yes, the path is I must ship it back. Day two is your corporate IT receives it, and that's assuming that they have the time and the availability to fix it then, and they get it turned around in one day. And day three is shipping it back to the user. So, any type of endpoint challenges, you have a minimum of a 3-day turnaround for that user, in which case their productivity may go from 100% down to 25, maybe 50%, depending on how quickly you can get them a new endpoint, get them something that they can work in. So, and then on the hybrid work, yeah, you have no idea. I mean, I think as Jari mentioned, we've had, health issues over the last few years. We have, weather events, as Dana mentioned, middle of the country right now is dealing with a bunch of snow, and that shut down cities for a couple days, so users can't get to their office. We've got wildfires out in California, so people are needing to relocate then as well. So having that flexibility and having options always puts you in a better position.
And that's a great point too, Benjamin, about the 3-day minimum, because that's just getting a new device in their hands. And then depending on how that device management is, they still have to get their applications back on there. They might have to go through all the authentication, get the device to the way they want it so they can be, have that productivity. So all those things come into play too as well. So you're looking probably more to up to 5 days
Correct.
once they get full swing of back end being able to be have productivity.
Yep.
So here's some cost efficiency backed by data. This is from some Gartner data about TCO of models for DAS and laptop PC. So you're looking here about, for on the far left here, the taller one, the bottom is the IT cost, the top or the user cost. But you're looking at, traditional laptops are going to cost you, that 2200 or 2250 basically for that one. And then thin clients, 1500, and then apps only VMs. So if you're just presenting, multi-session VMs with applications only, that's going to be, that 1370 total. So, you're looking at not just IT cost, but the user cost as well. And then, thinking about savings for these that type of things, there are technologies out there where you can repurpose those as thin clients or or replace them with low cost thin clients too. But that still comes with some kind of cost as well. But the nice thing is that if you can repurpose those thin clients, that's going to help you with some of the savings there. But also too, as you get into those low cost thin clients, you're lowering the energy consumption as well. Which is going to be reduced IT overhead for the management, but also it's going to help you with those energy consumption costs also.
Yeah, and a lot of times, the big thing is not looking at just the acquisition costs. I see too many that will say, "Well, I can get this laptop for $1,500, and if I do all of this infrastructure, it's going to cost me $1,700 per user." And it's one of those that, okay, that is the initial cost, but let's assume at least a 3-year life cycle on these things. What's that long-term co cost going to be and the user impact? I mean, we talked about, like, let's assume that they have some sort of an event, hardware failure in there, then you have the shipping costs for both their device as well as their replacement device, the downtime, um, the unexpected things. CrowdStrike sending out an update that somehow now we have to touch every single endpoint. I mean, I can't tell you how many customers I had on their VDI environment. They roll back the image and they're back up and going within hours versus, major corporations were down for days before they were able to touch all those endpoints. So it's those ongoing costs of and that distance from where the support is to where the user is that really puts in some additional cost.
So, what do we do to help with these challenges? We kind of rethink our desktop strategies with virtualization. So, a couple of things here when you look at virtualizing those workloads and, using some kind of EUC solution to deliver those out to your end users, you're going to lower hardware and operational cost, right? So, for example, that's going to be more on the data center hardware, which we're going to get typically a longer life cycle out of, especially with a lot of enhancements coming through software nowadays. But also too, that's going to help with your operational costs because you're centralizing everything and not having to go out and touch lots of endpoints where you're doing things now in the data center. And like Benjamin said, when the CrowdStrike incident happened, they were able to roll back those base images in that environment quickly. Just a matter of doing like a reboot and getting those back up. Whereas physical devices, they're having to touch those and go through a lot of challenges to get those back online. And then scalability as well, being able to quickly scale up and scale up easily. So, for example, you know, you can get more. If depending on how you're sizing your environment, you might have the extra capacity and already planning for that. Possibly moving things over to your DR environment for temporary capacity as well. Or I'll talk about how you can use one of our offerings, our Nutanix Cloud clusters, to easily burst into the cloud to be able to have that temporary capacity when you need it in case there's some kind of event, and then scale that back down once you're past that event. And then security as well, as new features are coming out. And we'll talk about how Windows 11 added new security feature requirements that Windows 10 and previous versions didn't have. A lot of these things are done in software. So, typical software updates can help add these new features like, the trusted platform module. But on the virtualization side, it's going to be called the virtualized one. So VTPM, secure boot, and then virtualization based security, things like Credential Guard and the Windows subsystem for Linux. And then simplified IT, right? So again, since everything is centralized, everything is right there where IT has great processes and management of those, it is going to help that with easier upgrades and faster recovery. Again, back to Benjamin's example, just, roll back the image and you're back up. But also too, we have things that we're already backing up, snapshots, backup software, self-service snapshots as well if it's just certain data. So you have all those functionalities quickly built in when you bring things back in the data center. And then sustainability, right? So if we're getting longer life cycle out of the hardware because software is adding features that we don't have to rely on hardware for, um, we're getting that life cycle extended. Then also too, that's going to reduce e-waste. And then there's things, if we have shift workers or the way we're doing our data centers, that can also help with reduced energy and keeping our carbon footprint lower.
Yeah, and tying a couple of those things together and what you're talking about with bursting and NC2 in Azure, the scalability, not just scaling up, but scaling it back too when you no longer have that need. If you've got seasonality into your business or you had a sudden growth and you're trying to figure out what's the long-term process going to be for this and what do we invest in for the next 3 years, but we got to deal with something right now. If you go out and buy 1,000 laptops, those are yours. Those are a fixed asset that you have to then maintain for those next 3 years. Whereas if you've got a solution that you can expand out, but then you can contract back, then you can lower those costs for the long term and then right size that once you kind of get a grasp and see what that steady state's going to be. I mean, you may need to burst out to 1,000 for the next 3 months, but it may only long term be 200. At that point in time, you have 800 endpoints that you have to figure out what am I going to do with them? How am I going to use them? And then the cost is on the books either way.
So we do have a question here from Kevin here saying most of my company uses laptops. How does Nutanix handle portable needs? It all depends how you define portable. Now there are some cases where you're not going to completely get rid of laptops for those high mobility users that may have to have an offline use case. But for most of us, the users who actually work from like either from home or from the office, or we kind of roam around where we're actually in a location to where we can use like a low cost thin client to access like a virtual desktop. So Nutanix can help by hosting that infrastructure for that, and be able to allow users to come in and have that remote session. Now, that's going to be the best case if the users are always online or have some kind of connection. That kind of goes back to what EUC is great for, that any use case, kind of anywhere, any device type model. But if you're in a use case where it's going to be highly offline and portable, that's where you might have to look at those use cases and still have a device in hand for that user base.
Yeah, and you also, I mean, think about too, like contractors, third party associates that come in is does your organization want to be responsible for providing a device for that person and how long are they going to be on contract for? And then also to their productivity, because now if you're saying, hey, you have to use my device to work on my stuff, then they're essentially changing their processes in order to support your organization, and you may not get that full value. Plus, just them saying, great, now I need to carry 2 laptops around to do my job. So those are other types of situations where having, again, options available to you to where you can provide whatever that resource is in a timely fashion, in the most appropriate fashion, helps both your organization, both just internally as well as its interactions with its other vendor partners.
So talking about Windows workloads, and yes, we have the Windows Server workloads as well, but the focus today is on the desktop side. So primarily out there in the landscape, majority are still heavy on Windows 10. Yes, there's some who've already started the transition to Windows 11. But Windows 10 was pretty straightforward. It didn't require any extra features security wise. Yes, you could use UEFI and that kind of stuff if you wanted to, but all that stuff was optional. There weren't any hard requirements as far as security settings on the device or a virtual machine to be able to use Windows 10. But we're coming to the end of the road with Windows 10 in October of this year. So that's going to transition to Windows 11. And then Windows 11 does require extra security features like UEFI as part of the BIOS, secure boot, the trusted platform module on hardware, or in virtual, the VTPM. And those are required to run. And then you have things like Credential Guard, which adds extra security but is optional. But the main thing to run Windows 11 is that device has to meet the requirements, has to be able to have UEFI, secure boot, and some type of TPM, whether it's virtual or physical. Now, there is talk about there about Microsoft possibly relaxing some of the requirements around TPM, but that's hasn't come to pass yet, and so we're still in these requirements that we have right now before us.
Yeah, I think, I mean, on those, excuse me, some of those requirements, they're not going to go away because they're all security related. So now is a perfect time. You know, if you haven't planned your transition or you're at the beginning of it, go ahead and plan for it. Make it part of your plan because if it's not, if the requirements relax now, it's still going to come. So it makes sense to plan for it now while you're already in your transition phase.
And so, what are these security features? So, credential card, which is the optional one, it's Microsoft Defender. So basically, this uses virtualization based security or VBS, and this isolates and protects secrets. You know, kind of to block things like pass the hash or pass the ticket attacks. Again, this one is the optional one, but some choose to use this as an extra security layer. But the first one is going to be UEFI. So when you see a lot on platforms, they'll have your legacy boot or they'll have UEFI. And so, like Windows 10 can boot with legacy boot, but Windows 11 is going to require UEFI. And this is basically that BIOS piece, that interacting between the OS and the hardware or the hypervisor, allowing them to use the advanced security features like secure boot. So to be able to use secure boot, you have to have UEFI first. So that's the base. And then secure boot, basically that tells you that what I'm booting is trusted, and there's been no unauthorized software in the system from taking control when that device boots. And then I talked about TPM, which is the physical trusted platform module, but then we have VTPM, which is the virtual one. So it's an emulation of that physical one. It's in software. So when you get into virtualizing these workloads, as long as the hypervisor supports VTPM and allows you to assign that to those virtual machines, then you are able to virtualize those Windows 11 workloads that require it.
Yeah, and to that point, like when we talk about acquisition costs, I mean, you may have some data center equipment that is a couple years old that doesn't have a physical TPM because we're doing this in software, we can still support that workload. Whereas those physical endpoints, you may not have that option. And again, you know, Microsoft may relax that requirement, but at some point in time, that's going to be a hard and fast requirement. So you will have to replace that device. You know, maybe not in the immediate term, but at least in the short term. So the fact that we can make these changes and support these features in software, again, gives you more flexibility and options as to how you roll this out and where you leverage this.
So why not Nutanix, or so why Nutanix for virtualizing Windows 11? So for those of you who aren't familiar with Nutanix, we are a hyper-converged infrastructure, HCI. So we're combining that compute, storage, networking into a single platform. We do have our own enterprise-grade hypervisor, Nutanix AHV. We also support other hypervisors as well, which when customers come to Nutanix, they may stay on those, or at that time migrate over time. But AHV does support all those security features that we talked about. So we do have VTPM, we have secure boot, we have the UEFI option, and we also support credential guard as well. And then we do have hybrid multi-cloud capability. So I mentioned our Nutanix cloud clusters, or NC2 for short. That allows you to extend your environment when you need that extra capacity, whether it's for bursting or for disaster recovery. And then our platform, we do have built-in disaster recovery. So we have integrated replication, we have snapshots, we have where we can cover against data loss as well, and we also integrate with third-party backup vendors as well. We do support things like self-service restore. So if there's some kind of file, they can do that. But you know that time to recover in case of an issue is all built into our platform.
Yeah, and that's on top of all of the underlying tech that makes that has been the platform for EUC workloads as far as how it optimizes storage, gives the performance for that end user experience as well. So like this would be the management on top of that, how you as IT can efficiently manage the Windows 11. And then we also have all of the underlying technology and features and performance that give the end user the positive experience that we need to make sure that they've got.
And so, how do we support Windows 11 on Nutanix? So these are just the minimums here. So our hypervisor has a minimum version, our AOS, which is our base platform, our Prism Central, which is our management, and then we have our drivers that go into the OS, our VirtIO, and then making sure that as when you're rolling those VMs out, whether it's through a manual build with the ISO or through automation like MDT or Packer, or pick the tools you use to automate your deployment of virtual machines, making sure that you have UEFI, secure boot, and VTPM enabled. But I do want to reiterate, these are the minimums, and there are some other newer versions you might want to do, depending on what kind of features and functionality you need, but also to just keeping the platform up to date. Again, because we're all software, and the beauty of software is that we can add new features and functionality to improve performance and add more security features without having to change the hardware out. So that's the beauty of virtualization. So, for example, we just released our AHV 10, which with every AHV release, we add things to help get better improvement, performance, security on the same hardware, because again, we do everything inside of software.
Yeah. To Jarian's point, I mean, Windows 11 has actually been out for a lot longer than I think most people realize. So, in that time, other areas of the environment, other like software vendors and management tools have changed and updated as well. So certainly make sure that you meet these minimums, but plan for some of those other integrations that you have in your environment, whether it's graphical workloads, your backup and recovery environment, to make sure that, certainly this gets you a booting a Windows 11 machine, but all those management tools and resiliency that you have in your environment, make sure that all of those meet the necessary requirements as well.
And as we talked about, those are the bare minimums to run Windows 11 on Nutanix. But there are some considerations too as well for Windows 11. So enabling VTPM. So there are two ways that you can enable VTPM for a virtual machine. Actually, there's three ways because we have APIs as well. But from administrative standpoint, our Prism Central, which is our main multi-cluster administration piece, that's going to be in the UI when you're creating the VM. If you're still not using Prism Central as a customer and you're just using our Prism element, you are not going to see the option in the UI, but you can use our ACLI interface to go ahead and turn that on at the command line, but we also have APIs as well. But if you are a Nutanix customer and you are using end user computing on our platform, all the vendors we're pushing towards Prism Central integration, where traditionally today the ones that we support now have all been Prism Element, and we'll talk about some of that a little bit later as well. As far as protecting, so the previous slide showed that you have to use, the minimums to run Windows 11 and support VTPM. But to protect them, we actually recommend using our Nutanix disaster recovery. So if you're still using protection domains as a customer, you may also want to look at our Nutanix disaster recovery. And again, that's also part of Prism Central. These are the minimums for that. That allows you to be able to replicate those to across clusters, whether you're on production and disaster recovery, or have this like a multi-location environment where you manage things centrally and push things out to those remote sites through there. We do fully support the virtualization-based security, which allows you to use Credential Guard and the Windows subsystem for Linux. Um, Also to note that the subsystem for Linux VMs, they can't be live migrated, and that's more of a developer, high-end IT user in use case for that. And then GPUs as well. Now, this is not a Nutanix limitation. This is an NVIDIA one. So currently, NVIDIA does not support VBS, which that's going to impact the use of Credential Guard in the Windows subsystem for Linux. So right now, you kind of got to look at those use cases and say, do I need these features or do I need GPUs? So there's things to note out there, and that's something that we will support once NVIDIA supports that.
Yeah, and so now you can, at the beginning I said it's not just the Windows 11 part, it's all the other pieces that go into it. So now you can start to see like here are some of the use cases. I mean, VDI for developers has been something that just continues to grow because developers are all over the place and they're working for organizations across the globe as well. So, you know, getting Windows 11 is one thing, but now we have to figure out how our users actually going to use this and what is it that we need to do to make sure that we can give them that full environment that allows them to do their work and allows us as the IT professionals to manage it and keep everything safe and running and resilient for the users.
And so this is what it looks like in the UI. So when you go through the Prism Central UI VM creation, you'll see options. It's the second after you click on like and you select like the VM name and the like the compute resources for like vCPU and RAM and so forth. You click next, and the second screen at the bottom, you'll see the boot configuration piece, and that's where you're going to have the UEFI BIOS mode or the legacy. And again, for Windows 11, you have to select that UEFI BIOS mode, and then you'll have the options enabled to enable secure boot and attach a VTPM. And then optionally, if you want to use credential guard, you can enable that there as well. But this is what it looks like from a UI perspective to as you're going through Prism Central. And then, kind of goes back to the conversation. Okay, so we know all this stuff we need. Nutanix supports everything we need for Windows 11. What's the conversation look like as far as do we upgrade our existing environment or do we build new? And that's going to come into a couple things. Kind of start at the bottom here. Was what is your time frame, right? Upgrading in place could be a short term fix that if you have to get to Windows 11 for some workloads or some use cases quickly, but you still want to look at long term as possibly, you know, deploying new VMs and migrating users over to them because as you go through that, that's where you look at the application landscape, right? Do my applications support upgrading to Windows 11? Are they Windows 11 compatible? Do I have any homegrown or custom applications as well? And a lot of times in from my consulting past and even now, talking with customers, sometimes there's applications that they haven't maintained or the talent that built those has left and they can't touch those applications. And then the build process too. Now's a good time, or it's been a good time as you look at upgrading or building new, especially when you look at building new and migrating users over to that. As far as look at our tooling, right? What kind of process do we have in place to build it? Are we using automation? Are we using any kind of tools for this? Is it time to look at automation? Is it time to look at new tooling? Also, too, what are our application install processes? Do we have any kind of tooling around that as well?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to talk about a prime time to start to look through this, it's when you have a platform update like an OS upgrade. Um, you know, Lots of organizations have had, we had the pandemic, we had the great resignation. So we had a lot of, historical knowledge that left a lot of companies. So you don't necessarily know how it got there. And you want to have something that is automatic and it's repeatable. Because too, how many people really like sitting there and installing applications and installing Windows updates? Whereas if you could have a process that automates that, and then two, we can pull that application and separate that from the underlying platform, whether it's a virtualized or a physical Windows 11, then again, we have more options available to us if our use cases change. If our users say we had a user that had a physical laptop before and now that makes sense for them to have a virtual or vice versa, if we don't have that application tied to the platform, then we can provide a user experience to where they can make that shift and nothing really changes for them. So as you go through this, this is a perfect time to look through all of those processes and find ways that maybe we can make an investment now that will be a little bit more upfront cost, but over the long term sets us up for success so that the next time the next Windows upgrade comes around, we really don't even have to think about this. It's just updating a process and saying, all right, we were Windows 11 yesterday, and today we're Windows whatever version we're going to come up with next.
And that kind of leads us into our application compatibility in data, right? So as we're also making this transition, where does that data live? Because user data is a big one. Are we backing up those devices? Are we doing like things like known folder move and putting things in OneDrive? Are we using like that as far as cloud storage, or do we have local file servers as well? So as you're going through this, looking at that and saying, where is that data stored and how can we help kind of get control of that data and making sure that we're not losing anything if it's local on the device and not accounting for it. And then back to again, do we have that talent in-house or do we know through like documentation or any kind of procedures as far as if we have those custom homegrown apps and can we, put those on devices that we have to roll out new? And then back to again, readiness, right? Do we support Windows 11? Are my applications ready? So all these things kind of come into play. Application and data compatibility are big things because it's not just like Benjamin said before, the Windows OS shell. That's the easy part, but all the stuff that needs to go on that to make our users have good productivity and be able to do their jobs.
Yeah, the apps and data, that's honestly what the end users are caring about. How do I do my job? What is it that I'm using and what is the data that I'm working on? And making sure that we can provide it to them in an efficiently managed way so that they have access and they have the user experience and the performance that they want. And we have a way of maintaining that data, securing it, managing it, making sure that we have controls and compliance put around that as well.
And then what about performance, right? So what's my impact as I'm going from Windows 10 to Windows 11? So obviously because of the added security features, Windows 11 is going to use more CPU. And this is some of the data that we do within our team at Nutanix is that as things change, new Windows versions, new hardware, new AHV, new AOS, all that kind of stuff that we test and make sure what's the delta and the difference. Is there anything that we can do on our platform to improve that through software? And then through our NVD, our Nutanix Validated Design, and our reference architecture, we publish out there for customers as well to kind of see this as kind of like their starting guide for Nutanix when they're virtualizing through their brokers on Nutanix. So, the steady state basically is saying that once we have a full load in the cluster and everyone's logged on and it's settled down and we're just starting to go through our application workflow, you're seeing about a 10% difference in that steady state between Windows 10 and Windows 11. And also too, just because of the changes, there is a little bit performance as far as like the response time or application launch. And then looking at this is you're thinking about, okay, as we're looking at this and going from Windows 10 to Windows 11, we're going to look at how we're assigning our virtual CPUs or cores to those virtual machines, right? So where you might have been in that 2 to 3 CPU range for Windows 10, you're looking at that 3 to 4 CPU range for Windows 11 and more leaning towards the 4 vCPU side. But the main thing there is making sure that the applications I have on there are multi-threaded applications that can take advantage of the multiple CPU cores on that Windows 11 virtualized instance.
Yeah, and we also have to take into account too some of the new features that are coming out from Microsoft that are just built into the OS, even outside of the applications. I mean, AI and Copilot, every customer I'm talking with is figuring out how is this going to impact the environment? What are they doing with it? So that alone right there is going to add in some performance requirements on top of what you used to have. So keep those things in mind that even as Jarian said, at a steady state, those are going to still be there and working in the background.
And then what about as I go from, different versions of Windows 11, like 21H2 to 22H2 to 23H2, there is some CPU impact there, along with storage and logon times also. And then depending on the applications, there's also impact there. So as you're going forward in your environment and patching and updating, making sure that you have some kind of test environment too, to make sure you understand what the impact is in your environment as new versions come out, new patches come out as well to make sure that you're still able to provide your end users with a great end user experience.
Yep, absolutely.
So what's the stack for Nutanix for EUC? So I mentioned that we have our own hypervisor, AHV, and it supports all the features and functionality that you need for Windows 11. We have files, which is our own scale out file system that you can, store things like the user data, the profiles, departmental shares, and so forth. We have our flow, which is our application centric security. So we can do things at the VM level, do policy based visualization as well. And then NC2, which is our hybrid cloud offering. So being able to use bare metal instances in the hyperscalers to be able to use that for things like bursting or disaster recovery. Automation as well. So we do have automation built in to help you automate some of this, but also to once those are deployed, doing things for, day-to-day automation or, day two automation. Like, does my VM need more resources? Well, we can build some things out to where we can automatically scale up and scale down those VMs to help with that. And then as I talked about, we have disaster recovery built in, whether it's single site or multi-site disaster recovery.
Yeah, and one of the nice things, I'll hone in on the files section of it. I mean, we just got done talking about it's the applications and it's the data. The fact that Nutanix has, a built-in native scale-out file server so that we don't have to have that other question of, all right, sweet, we've got the actual compute infrastructure. Now what do we do about the data? It's part of the overall package. So when we talk about a solution that can manage that end user experience, it takes into account all the pieces. So not just, hey, I can get my Windows VM to my user, but I can present and provide the data that they need as well.
And then mention the files. So files is built in. It's part of the same interface that we use for our Prism Central management as well. So we have all the things built in for high availability, continuously available shares, the SMB 3.1 protocol, the same easy upgrades of it through our same platform that we do to upgrade things like AHV and AOS. We also have things built in for this for DR replication. We just released a feature called VDI sync, which allows you to kind of sync things between your locations, between two locations, but also to be able to roam back and forth as well. You can only be active on one side, but you have that roaming capability with it. The one thing this does is that it helps you keep the data close to your workloads. And I'll talk about licensing here pretty soon. But for our EUC licensing for Nutanix, we include licensing entitlement for files as well. And then our files analytics, right? Having that data out there, but what kind of visibility do I have in that? And that helps things like looking at, how the data is being used. Are there any suspicious patterns of the data? Do I need to have things like built in to see like blocking files, or if there are suspicious things to help lock down that data in case there's any kind of malware incident in the environment? And that's all included in the platform.
Yeah, I mean, I can't tell you the number of customers I've walked into their environment and looked at the files analytics piece and been like, hey, you realize that probably three-quarters of your storage is unutilized. Your users haven't touched it in over a year. So not only that, I mean, we talk about ongoing cost savings too, is then we have the visibility of, all right, we've got a lot of data that maybe we could store in a more efficient manner and save the primary storage on Nutanix files for that stuff that the users are actually interacting with. So that visibility is huge.
Question here: does Nutanix offer anything for user profile management in Windows 11? So we don't directly. That's going to be part of your broker solution. So we do fully support things like FS Logics from Microsoft. We support Liquidware's profile solution. We support profile management from Citrix. We support, on our files instance, any kind of profile solution from the actual EUC broker out there. So we're just a storage for it and have capabilities for like, helping assure making sure that's available and replicating it. But as far as the actual profile solution itself, that's going to come as part of the broker. Now you can still use roaming profiles in Windows, but that's kind of an old technology that most don't use. But as far as using like the broker built-in profile solution or Microsoft's or third party like Liquidware, we fully support that, and we also support things like fold redirection for the storage as well.
Yes, I mean it's a perfect target for leveraging all of the storage optimizations that are built in the Nutanix platform to make sure that that profile and where it's stored is close to the user and is on a performant platform so that it can get with the user settings and that user data to the user as quickly as possible.
So I'm kind of going to pick things up here, just kind of more about the Nutanix side of things, since we're getting close to the end here. But we are a differentiated platform for EUC. So what that means is freedom of choice, right? You guys can bring your own broker that supports us, right? And again, our main hypervisor is AHV, but we also support other ones as well. So as long as that broker supports the hypervisor that our platform supports, you can pick that, whether it's a control plane managed by you or a control plane managed by the EUC broker. Licensing also. So you have two options for licensing, which is a per user licensing model, which I'll talk about here in a second, or we have our traditional core-based model as well. And then performance in the platform, this is something that we test, and I'll get more of this, but as far as like scalability and so forth, we test all these things, making sure that as you scale out, there's no dip in the performance of your platform. And then again, we also have a unified platform, which we showed that you get everything in the platform, along with your hardware of choice that we support as well. So our files, our hypervisor, our NC2 security, and so forth. But here's the big one here, right? So we do have flexible per user licensing. This licensing also includes disaster recovery. So, if you have a disaster recovery site with Nutanix and you have the per user licensing, that's also included for this. If you want to use our NC2 offering, we have three levels of licensing: Starter, Pro, and Ultimate. NC2 Ultimate will give you the NC2 entitlement as well, that I'll talk about coming up for using our offering in Azure or AWS. But the nice thing here is that you basically just assign your licenses count, your number of VMs. It doesn't matter how many nodes in the cluster that you have. So, for example, our core-based licensing is going to look at the hardware, but our user base doesn't care. So you see here that you could have 500 users on 3 nodes or 500 users on 6 nodes. We don't care how many nodes you have in the cluster with EUC user licensing, as long as your users are covered. And that's going to all depend on your different hardware requirements. The nice thing is that you can pay as you grow too as well. So, right, you only need X amount now, and then your environment expands. You can add more licenses later. And we also support things like, concurrent users across different time zones or shifts also. So all those nice things are built in the platform for our user licensing. Have we started testing on Windows 12 yet on the insider stuff? I need to double check to see. But I know a lot of our testing right now has been Windows 11, and I know we're doing some 2025 Story 2025 testing as well.
Yeah, I say I haven't seen too many. I see more customers that they still don't even have a Windows 11 strategy yet. So that's interesting that somebody's already looking to skip over Windows 11.
But also our linear scale. So again, talked about scalability in the platform, and this is not just a marketing slide. We actually test this as well. So for example, if you are getting 100 users on one node, you should scale linearly, meaning that you should be able to get 200 on 2 nodes, and then 300 on 3 nodes, and etc. So you should be able to increment that amount linearly. And again, we test this as well. So what you get on day one in your journey, you should be able to have that same scalability when you get further along in your journey as well. And that gives things like our data locality, our shadow clones, all those things that we have on our platform, along with our software. That's like, again, every time we update this, we make sure we test it within our team. If there's any issues, we go back to our dev team, they fix it, we test again, making sure that as we release new software releases, that our platform is staying performant or getting better performance as we improve it.
Yeah, and this is where Jarian to mention the Nutanix validated designs. Those are a wealth of information for, what is it that I would expect based off of a particular workload. Nutanix has done all the testing. They've got how we tested it. Here's what we put it on to, so that way you have that kind of base foundational. Because every manager can be like, well, how much is it going to take to get my users? So Nutanix has already done the legwork for it. Obviously, every environment's a little bit different, but it at least gives you that foundational information to start that conversation with.
And that NVD is available out there on our portal. It covers on-prem. It covers going to Azure and AWS as well with our NC2 offering.
Yep.
So we are true hybrid multi-cloud. So we're able to, if you want to start on-prem in your data center, but then you have a mandate to use cloud for some use cases or for DR, we support that in Azure and AWS. And then if there's locations or hardware types that you need that we don't have on the hyperscalers, that's where we have our service providers as well that can also provide those. The nice thing is that our interface is going to be the same across those. So our built-in tools for replication and so forth, you can use to move back and forth. So you have a mandate to be on-prem in AWS today, but tomorrow you want to move to Azure. Well, guess what? Your licensing is portable and those workloads are portable as well. And so what is our cloud clusters offering? Basically, it's taking our software, our AOS, our AHV, our hypervisor, and moving those onto bare metal nodes in the cloud. So in AWS, it's going to be in your VPC. In Azure, it's going to be in your VNet, and it's going to have access to all of your cloud services as well that you have out there. So maybe you have some modernized applications out there in the cloud. You can take advantage of those and access those through NC2. The nice thing also is that if you have any kind of contracts with those hyperscalers or credits and so forth, those can also be used with those offerings on NC2. Again, this is our software on bare metal nodes. It is not nested software. It is bare metal nodes out there. And then this will be easy to move things back and forth and extend as we go to other hyperscalers out there in the future. I'm going to speed up here a little bit, Benjamin. Okay.
Yep. Yep. Go for
Okay.
it.
And then so workload portability and or workload conversion. So we talked about being able to move things, whether it's on-prem, it's to a colo or managed service provider, or it's between hyperscalers, right? So think about, as you change hypervisors or as you go through different cloud hyperscalers using native, it's that image might have to go through a reconstruction and refactoring where that can, possibly be new tools, new build process, the testing, the time to value of getting those workloads there and being able to be usable versus distribution, right? Where I can build once and ship anywhere. So, with EUC on NC2, it's simple and powerful. So as long as the broker supports AHV and gets validated for NC2, we can easily move you across hyperscalers that we support from on-prem. So again, you might be on-prem in AWS today, on-prem in Azure tomorrow. Licensing is portable, the workload is portable, no refactoring and reformatting. Now, we have a few brokers like Citrix and WorkSpot who have already been validated for NC2. And the main thing is making sure that it's tested and works and functional. And we go through that process within our team. With AWS, it's all Prism Element integrated. So most of our solutions today have a Prism Element integration where they should work on AWS, just need to be validated. But Azure, because of some changes we did with the networking integration, it's using a Prism Central interface. So Citrix has already gone through the process of validating that for Prism Central. We are GA for our integration with Prism Central on Azure. We're in tech preview for non-Azure Prism Central right now through Citrix DAS. So that's enabled in the control plane, and you can test that out with GA for non-Azure Prism Central coming later this year. So look forward to that. And that's going to be for both control planes too. We also just completed the validation with WorkSpot as well for Azure and Prism Central for their integration. And then any new brokers that come along or talk to us, we say, hey, we're moving everything towards Prism Central. So if you're an existing one, start working on a Prism Central interface for your solution. Or if you're a new one, start at Prism Central as well. And then so I talked about that whole thing about portability, right? So you go through the process of build, test, deploy, patch, repeat. One location it's easy, right? So in one platform it's easy. But what happens when you start extending that out? So if you go from one, like Nutanix, and then try to go to a native public cloud, that's where you have to have that refactor come in. And then you go into that spray and pray model to making sure that refactoring, that reformatting, that conversion going to native cloud from my source hypervisor is working fine with no problems. But think about that as you go to multiple clouds with different platforms, with different interfaces where you have to reformat for Azure, AWS, GCP, someone else in the future. You actually make that problem even bigger because you're managing 4 different sets of images and possibly more because they're all different platforms. The nice thing with NC2, again, because it's our software, same interface, same everything, you're just putting our hypervisor on bare metal nodes. So using our built-in tools to replicate those images out there. So when you need bursting or disaster recovery or that extra capacity, you just basically connect in via VPN or direct connect or express route or whatever connectivity the cloud offers, and just set up our clusters out there and then replicate that to a target out there. And so now you're in that distribution model where I'm not changing anything. I'm not having to convert. I'm not having to look at new tools. And then think about that as you get into a bigger cloud type scenario. So maybe you want to be multi-cloud. Like we do have some customers that have to be on-prem and in 2 clouds. So think about that as well. So as we go to NC2 on Azure, NC2 on AWS, and then some choose to use one hyperscaler plus one of our partners out there like Equinix or Sextera, or OVH Cloud, or our partners like Choice Solutions as well, who have their managed services offering as well. So think about having to move those back and forth, and easy, and it's all distribution with that single platform, that single interface, not having to learn all that those new tooling or any kind of conversion. But how do you get to Nutanix, right? So we do have a tool called Move, and our tool allows you to be able to come over from different hypervisors. So, like I said, if you're like on a non-Nutanix environment and you come over and you want to go to AHV, we have our Move tool for that that can help you do that migration. You can seed it, you can do testing. It does all the things like inject our drivers and so forth. Um, you can use that, or say you come over to Nutanix and you stay on the hypervisor like vSphere, Hyper-V that we support. You can use Move as well to do that migration, or with ESXi vSphere, if you're on Nutanix, we have things like our cross hypervisor stuff that we can do also. The nice thing is that we have these toolings built in to help you get from, whether it's cloud native, whether it's another hypervisor, to easily come over to our platform as you make that migration for your EUC environment. And since we're a few minutes over, I just want to get to the last piece here. So think about a smarter path forward, right? So think about cost savings, reduced hardware upgrades. Again, since on the data center side, since we're in software, we can add new features and functionality like VTPM, other things that might come in the future through software. It doesn't require a hardware change. Be able to repurpose your endpoints to be able to get longer life out of them, and maybe put the software that like thin client vendors out there have conversion tools and so forth in management to be able to help get that to, one, secure that device, but two, to help manage it as well to get a longer life out of that device, improving your TCO of those devices. And then think about bringing things centrally managed, how easy it is to patch things, to fix things in event something happens, all in a central tooling to back up things and recover things. Having that security, right? Again, it's software. So as new requirements come out, we can add that into software instead of having to refresh that hardware, where on endpoints you may have to replace that hardware because they don't meet those needs for those new security and compliance standards. And then scalability, I talked about that. We can easily scale, whether it's in your data center or if you need extra capacity, using our NC2 offering to be able to extend that to a cloud temporarily if you need to, and then spin that back down. And then again, getting better life, you're reducing cloud waste, or sorry, e-waste. Extending the life of the hardware is helping with sustainability. So think about that as well. And then all that stuff is built into our platform to kind of help you future-proof your infrastructure with Nutanix. Um, Last thing here, and I'll let Ben speak to one of these, is if you want to learn more, you can go to nutanix.com/EUC. We have our test drive platform where we can test drive things like NC2. You can test drive, look at our interfaces. All those things are out there free without having to do anything as far as spin anything up. It's all part of our test drive platform. So if you go to nutanix.com/one platform, you can see all of our test drives out there and get a look at our interfaces, our tooling, and how things work if you're not familiar with our platform. And with that, I'll hand it over to Benjamin.
Yeah, and if you need further help too, we have Dana mentioned our EUC advisory services where we come in and we help understand what's going on with your business and help you work together to develop a roadmap as to what is the EUC landscape going to look like for the organization, as well as Nutanix Jumpstart. So if you need help saying, hey, I just need to get this thing off the ground, we'll help you, whether it's files, whether it's flow, Nutanix Cloud Manager, help get you started down that path. So you can get those wheels spinning in your head of, okay, here's how I could use this in my environment. So we've got a full set of EUC-based jumpstarts and advisory services as well as Nutanix. So if there's anything that we can be doing to help you, let us know. If there's something that you see that, hey, it's not, I don't see it on that page, reach out to us. We have professional services. We have a huge team that can help and get in there and help you figure out what it is that you need to take your business to the next level.
And then one last thing too is that we were having .next this year in DC, May 7th through 9th. So there's a QR code to learn more about that, for anyone who's interested in attending the conference and working with us and Choice Solutions. So there's the info for that, and I'll hand it over to Dana.
Yeah, guys, holy cow. I know we went a few minutes over, but all sorts of gold, all sorts of good stuff, and tips and ideas. So Jarian, Benjamin, Thank you guys. This is incredible content, and yeah. So we got a survey.